So normally around this time of year, this would be the part where me and Chris decide to do something really strange and obscure that usually only we like. And it does help that Legend of Vox Machina to just wrap up its run this weekend. But we're not doing that. We're going with, again, the return of yet another super popular Netflix show that everyone on the internet seems to love. And then if you ask, like, you know, any person that's not our age in real life, they're like, what the hell is that show? It's funny. I think there was even like a Fox News pundit where somebody was trying to explain the show to somebody on Fox News, and they didn't understand it. It ended up being like an Abbott and Costello sketch. It was great. But we are here to talk about the premiere of the 4th season of, again, I feel like kind of a sneaky one of Netflix's like overnight viral successes with the return of season 4 of You, starring Penn Badgley as the iconic, I will say now, Joe Goldberg. I'm joined by Kristen, aka Miss Filming. Kristen, happy to have you back on the channel. You ready to talk about You?
I'm ready to talk about You.
I see what you did there. All that and more on today's episode of the Talkin TV podcast. What is going on, people? It is Saturday morning. We are recording this, not on our normal day of Sunday, but like I said, this has become, I don't even know how to describe this show, because I feel like with every single big, like, kind of Netflix viral hit of the past, you know, your Ozarks, your Cobra Kai's, your Stranger Things, all of that, I feel like there's always like a big countdown. There's always like a big setup. You know, Netflix with their lack of marketing always like makes such a big deal about it. And I feel like with You, I feel like in a strange way, like, I really wasn't aware of the show until the 3rd season dropped 2 years ago. I believe because my housemate was watching at the time, Dontre, who's been on this podcast before. He was actually on a couple weeks ago in order to talk about the DC stuff when that dropped. And, like, I'd heard of the show. I'd seen, like, some posters of it beforehand, but I didn't really know what it was about. I'm like, okay, it's another dude that just stares creepily. Okay, I don't really get it. I didn't know that Greg Berlanti was behind it. I knew nothing about the show. And then once my housemate, once Dontre explained it to me, I was like, I'm not sure if that's something that I would necessarily be interested in. It's kind of exhibits a lot of things that I don't like about a lot of popular shows that people are into. I feel like it's kind of in a strange way, some similar problems that I have to Euphoria. But needless to say, the 4th season was premiering. I'm finally like, look, unfortunately, I have, if I want to continue to be a good critic in this age of the internet where nothing makes sense and nobody watches things that are actually successful, and people only seem to be obsessed with things that are really, really bad and just seemingly popular, I'm like, unfortunately, I have to continue to do my role as a good critic. I have to figure out what the hype about this show is about. And so I finally turned on the first episode of the show, which, funnily enough, I didn't even realize that this wasn't actually a Netflix original production. It was a Netflix one of those famous early on Netflix acquisitions that, like, they scooped up, that, like, and have had a presence on Netflix for so long now that people have forgotten that it was originally a Lifetime original, which is hilarious in its own right. But
did you know that before? Because I know when we were going back and forth, I was like, yeah, I used to watch this on Lifetime. Like,
yeah. So when I was doing my research about the show, I did see, I'm like, this wasn't a Netflix original. And then I saw what it was originally on. I'm like, oh, that's amazing. That's so incredible in and of its own right. But so I turned on the first episode, I watched it, and I'm like, motherfucker, God damn it, Greg Berlanti. Like, every time I want to write this guy off and just be like, all he does is just stupid bullshit soap opera garbage. Like, put it this way, Greg Berlanti is responsible for us getting a decade of actually good DC storytelling in live action in the form of all those CW shows that we got that then sort of made this weird transition into the DC universe stuff that eventually became HBO Max, you know, your Titans and your Doom Patrol. I don't know how much involvement he had in those shows, but from what I understand, again, they all kind of had the springboard of the CW stuff that we got for the last decade, you know, that started with Arrow and then continued with The Flash, Legends of Tomorrow, Stargirl, Black Lightning, all the other shows that we've gotten on there as a result, you know, all of which have had varying qualities. But I think the thing that we could say about Greg Berlanti as a creator, first and foremost, is that, man, the dude comes up with some good premises. He comes up with some good premises, and I will say that the openings, he always finds a way to lock people in. I don't know quite how he does it, but he always finds a way to lock people in. So, Chris, before we actually like get into you and your origin with Discover the Show, like, well, what are your thoughts on Greg Berlanti? Because, like, I don't think I've ever had more conflicting thoughts on a showrunner, probably since Ryan Murphy, I think.
Ooh, how do I feel about him? I am familiar with his work. Like, I know he did, like, some stuff with Dawson's Creek. Never really watched it. I know he did stuff with like the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, which I only watched like the first season, then just pretty much gave up on it. I don't know if anybody else. I don't know if you watched it.
I'm seeing a pattern here.
Yeah, and then I know he did like what you had mentioned, the DC shows, but I could never find a series where I was like ultimately like hooked. And then when I heard that this was an actual thing with Penn Badgley, because I knew him growing up from like Gossip Girl and stuff like that. I didn't really watch Gossip Girl, but he was that prime figure of like the mid 2000s, going up the same length as like, Rachel Bilson and Blake Lively and all those like CW stars. So I was like, he's playing a serial killer? Like, okay, let me latch on to the show. And I saw the first episode when it premiered because they were doing all the promotion. Uncle Jesse from John Stamos was going to be in it. And then Shay Mitchell from Pretty Little Liars was going to be in it. And I was like, what is this show? What is going on? And I tuned in when they used to premiere like every Sunday. And I was hooked. And then the finale, wait till you get to the finale. The finale is like craziness.
Oh, man. Yeah, just like, well, first of all, wait, John Stamos is in this show? When?
He'll show up probably like a little bit later, but yeah,
okay.
He's like a psychiatrist.
Oh my God. Okay, first of all, I already can't wait. Second of all, wait. Okay, actually, no, I know who you're talking about now. I
Amos with the full beard.
I can't believe, oh my God. That's why I didn't recognize him, because he had the full beard. Yeah. So I watched this first episode and I'm like, fuck. I'm like, this is like, my first thought was, I'm like, wait a minute, this aired on Lifetime. I'm like, this is actually well written. This has got a compelling lead. It's got like a really interesting narrative. I'm like,
and it was interesting because Lifetime is never for one a show that can actually deliver great content. I mean, we got the Christmas movies. Everybody gets those every year, but it's very rare where you get that thing that will catch a spark. And knowing they didn't want to do a second season, I was like, how? Like, why?
Well,
like,
I mean, I can tell you why. It's because they were like, this might be a little bit too dark and bloody for us.
And kind of
kills multiple
and again,
people.
it's Lifetime. They've done the most ridiculous things. I was like, okay, they should get away with this for another season. But then they put it on Netflix, and then that's when it all skyrocketed.
Right.
And then I was like, y'all never heard of this show? Like, I was like, what is wrong with you, quote unquote, for not watching it?
There's going to be a lot of those throughout this podcast.
Yes. And I just really enjoy this show. This is just like this ultimately fun, like serial killer fantasy. It's got like those Dexter vibes. It's got like all this funness where you just want to tune in and watch something like kind of gritty, but also that's almost very tame. I think over the years it's gotten so extreme, but the first season is so good.
God. If the first season is tame in comparison to future seasons, I can only imagine what kind of stuff they get into once Victoria
the first 5 episodes.
Those first 5 episodes were, I thought were like, they were pretty fucking good. Like, as far as just like
4,
I guess we should probably start by breaking down for people who have never heard of this show, like what exactly this show is about. So the show follows, in the first season at least, this lonely, seemingly isolated bookstore clerk named Joe Goldberg, portrayed by Penn Badgley, who is revealed to be basically the world's greatest stalker, essentially, in that he basically picks out these girls and essentially like constructs this fantasy around him in his head that is told to us, the audience, in constant voiceover narration, which you would think would get really irritating after a while, but they managed to like toe that line that is very difficult to do when it comes to narration of any kind, where they're like, okay, we're gonna have this voiceover instead be this inner monologue for this character that is a polar opposite to the facade that he presents to the world. Like he's just shown that he, like Dexter, has learned to acclimate and become like a sociable person to the world. But you also, what's interesting too, is similar to Dexter as well, you have these figures that are placed in there that are almost able to like see past the facade and see the real person that he is. Because again, some of his habits that happen include stealing this girl that he's into's phone, hacking into her iCloud account, constantly monitoring her messages, kidnapping her ex and forcing and basically interrogating him for information before poisoning him and murdering him. Just normal casual stuff, and like the web of lies and deceit that like constructs it. It's another one of those instances where I'm like, I understand how much of a soap opera this is, but it is so goddamn compelling. And I love that you brought up the point about the fantasy element of it, because you're right. I'm like, this is exactly like what we used to love about those TV shows of old, because the thing that we I feel like there's this weird relationship that Gen Zers specifically have with the TV that they watched of old, in the sense of where we would watch these shows and we would laugh when we were younger, right? Because they were all on pretty much when they were younger, all of these shows. And we would think that these shows like were life, shows like, like Glee and like Gossip Girl. And I know for me, How I Met Your Mother, as far as like, oh, so this is what it's like dating in New York. And then we get older and we have this sudden break with reality and we realize we're like,
life is nothing like that. Nobody's going to fancy parties and dressing up, and
none of this shit is real at all. It's like the Friends syndrome with our parents, because our parents grow up watching Friends, thinking that they're gonna like live in this massive apartment, and then they go and they realize they're like, oh wow, these guys like. What was a waitress? One was a chef, and one. And I'm like, how the hell did these two afford?
One's an
and that was in the
actor.
One's a struggling actor, and one's like a typist. I'm like, Chandler had a pretty good job, considering what days he had at 26. But like, come on, so that was the 90s version of that. And so as a result, but also our generation grew up with the internet. And so as a result, we're not able to move past anything in the way that our parents were. So now we've kind of developed this like love-hate relationship where it's like, I feel like a lot of attempts with a lot of these like old school characters from TV, that wouldn't work today, quote unquote, even though I still know everybody that loves The Office and shit like that. I feel like it's like a deeper reconciliation of trying to come to terms with the fact that they were lied to for so much of their youth by thinking that these TV shows were real. When in reality, it's like, nah, you were just too young to understand that what you were watching was a fantasy. And I feel like in a strange way, that is part of what has made some of these Netflix shows, the Netflix shows that have worked, I should say, work really well, because again, Netflix is, we've talked about it to death. They're focused on quantity over quality. The fact that they're just trying to pump out so much content because they are solely into originals. But the fact that because of that emphasis, so little of their stuff we are actually able to latch onto and really relate to. The irony being that, again, their most popular stuff, at least in my mind, has been not their originals, but their acquisitions. Again, The Office, shows like The Office, Lost, Breaking Bad, I am still of the opinion those shows soared to the popularity that they did because of Netflix and because of streaming, because they had their movement beforehand, but Netflix like skyrocketed them to that levels, and like I said, I have never understood why Netflix is so adamant about not having to pay the distribution rights for acquisitions anymore. I've never understood it because their acquisitions, to me at least, are the stuff that gets them views overall. So that kind of factors into this show as well, where you have a show that is essentially portraying like a serial killer fantasy where it's like, it's not exactly portraying, I mean, don't get me wrong, like it is blatantly showing his actions and showing like, yeah, any person with a brain watching the show will realize this is a messed up character that we should not be rooting for at all. And then it begs the question, you're like, why the hell am I so compelled by this? And I want you to take it from here because you had a lot of really good explanations before we started the show as far as why that is. I'm like, what is with this obsession with Joe Goldberg?
I think like what you just said, he's a very compelling character. He's had a character who just, I think, wants love. He's a character who wants, he wants this reality, this fantasy where, a girl just comes into life and just like changes him. And it does, at least from what you have watched, there's just one girl at the moment. Right. Now, as you get progressively into the series, there comes another girl, then another girl. And then now we are hit with season 4, where it's like this cat and mouse game where somebody's actually like almost playing him in a way. So it's very different. And, he gets away with so much as a character. You're just amazed of like, how did a cop not figure this out? How did anybody not figure this out? Like, Joe is a criminal mastermind at this point, and he gets away with everything. And that's why I think people are drawn to this series because of that, because you're like, how much can this guy get away with? Like, and he does. I mean, at this point, he's overseas in London. He was all over the US last time. Yeah. I mean,
mean, amazing. And that's also what's kind of funny. And I'm saving that for like the end of the podcast as well. But like, I feel like at this point, because the show's in its 4th season now.
It's in its 4th season.
Yeah. So and Netflix is doing that thing as well, where they're splitting up the season as well. They started that kind of experiment last year, and it looks like they're continuing it.
Which is, I think, not the best idea.
Well, it's weird. I think it's a hit or miss depending on the type of show that they do. I typically find that with their live action stuff, it's been really the only instance it's been successful with has been Stranger Things. The only reason why is because, again, the last 2 episodes were like we were basically getting like 2 full-length movies, as opposed to like, a regular season's worth of television. But more on that in a little bit. My big thing is it's like, okay, So you can tell they're in their 4th season now, right? And he's been getting away with this for quite a while, like I said, because I understand that, like I said, the New York thing doesn't work out for him in season 1, so he moves to LA in season 2, and that's when the Victoria Pedretti, the love character, comes in, and that's when things really get topsy-turvy. He does 2 seasons in LA. Season 3, they have a kid, and then things just start to devolve, and now he's over in Europe. And so my big question is, as somebody who has only seen 6 episodes of the first season, are we getting to that point now where it's starting to become a little bit unbelievable how he keeps getting away with this stuff? Because you always have that point in shows like this where, again, you have fun. This was another similar problem with Dexter, where it's like, again, you have fun watching them be good at what they do and get away with it and outsmart everyone over and over and over again. And that's fun for a while. But you always reach that breaking point where you're like, okay, how much longer is this guy really going to be able to get away with this, And I feel like that's always kind of the make or break, because, again, my biggest problem with Dexter, looking back, if we're going to compare this, because I feel like that's the fairest show to compare this to. I see also a lot of interesting allusions to Hannibal as well, especially once the love character comes in.
And I also kind of want to bring up Bates Motel a little bit as well, if you've seen that.
Absolutely. So. I would agree with that as well. Because the biggest thing is that, I just forgot my point. But it's that, like, I feel like my problem with Dexter was that I think the first 3 seasons of that, this is a problem that I attribute more so to Showtime than Dexter itself. But Dexter is always the prime example, because that was Showtime's most popular show for years before Shameless kind of took it over, is that Showtime has this incessant problem with having shows with an excellent premise and then dragging them out for way too long. Like, that, I think, was everyone's problem with Dexter. Like, Dexter went on for way too long, and to a point where it just got ridiculous and nonsensical, because it's like they had the intro season, which was great. They had season 2, which was great. Season 3 is kind of where this problem started, but season 3, the writing was still really good, where they're just giving Dexter antagonists to deal with, like you have Jimmy Smith in season 3 and Lithgow in season 4. Everybody loves the Lithgow season. I personally was not a fan of it. That was where my jumping off point with Netflix. At season 5, you have Julia Stiles come in, and they have like this Bonnie and Clyde thing. In season 6, you have the ritual Satan killers with Edward James Olmos and Colin Hanks. And then you have the Ukrainians come in season 7. And by the time you're like, how the hell have the cops not figured out that they have a fucking serial killer working for them? Right? Exactly. Yeah. Like somebody has to have figured it out. They're like, and also continually how everybody who seems to figure this out dies. Dokes died. LaGuardia dies. Everybody that gets close to figuring this out dies, and nobody bats an eye at this at all. So, like, I can't say anything on you yet, because I have not got to this point in the show yet, but I have a feeling that. And again, this is going to be the ultimate test as far as seeing just how loyal the people who watch the show and love the show are, is when are we going to get to the point where people are starting to realize, how convenient that this guy, it helps that he's constantly location hopping in order to get away, but everybody that seems to get close to this guy dies, or ends up like leaving, like you have like ironically enough, the only survivor of the bloody season 2 affair was Jenny Ortega, who was supposed to come back for this season as well, but unfortunately couldn't due to contractual obligations to Wednesday and Scream. And but like, so he's in London now, right? So you have seen have you seen all of the first 5 episodes that they dropped of season 4?
Yeah. Should I explain my thoughts about it?
Yes, please do, because that's going to inform my context as well, because I've only done some reading into 2 and 3. I have not looked at anything for 4 yet. Okay.
I feel like, as a fan of it, I really enjoy the aspect of the cat and mouse game of it all. Like, there's like, at least, and I'll say this, there's somebody at least dying in at least one episode, and it all could point to Joe. And there's like really no quite set love interest yet, even though I find it interesting.
The show's very on the nose with certain
it's very on the nose, which I kind of like enjoy about it, but there is something missing from it when I was watching it last night, and ironically enough, I felt like some of it was like dragged to a T, like some stuff of the plot stuff. Like, I don't want to get into it because I don't want to spoil it for anybody, because it's just fresh off, the plate on Netflix. So it's so like drawn out. I was like completely bored with some stuff. Like, there's this party stuff that happens. Some characters are more intriguing than others. Like, the best one that we are introduced is this character named Rise. I think his name is
Reese. Is that
Reese,
his name?
Reese. Okay.
If I'm not mistaken, portrayed by Ed Spellers, who we haven't seen since that failed attempt at Aragon back in 2006.
He's really good in that. And then I will say Lucas Gage from like Lotus. He's got an interesting premise to him. He plays a pansexual character who's got some secrets and a girlfriend. Like, I found that like part really interesting. Like, you know, the shady character. And there's so many like of these like millennials in it that like I just don't care about. And each like this millennial like is getting killed off one by one, like a social media star, an artist, and like all this stuff that like I just didn't really care about. Like my focus is on Joe and certain characters. Like there's too many characters for this season that I don't want to get invested in.
Interesting, yeah. And the other thing too also is that like I noticed that with the structure, especially when it comes to Netflix's 10-episode shows, I usually find that they kind of split it down the middle. Where the first 5 episodes, I've noticed this really since like Game of Thrones made their shift from season 4 to 5, where the first 5 episodes they're setting up so much, but they kind of fall a little bit into like dragging themselves out and taking up too much time. And then by the time you get to the last 5, that's when things like really start to kick into high gear.
Yeah,
You know, because
and that's
like
what I'm afraid of. That's what's going to happen because if after watching the first 5 episodes, they give you like a little 30-second trailer of what's going to come up.
right,
And everything that they show in that 30 seconds is stuff I want to see.
right.
That includes, you know, a character from the past that may have shown up and all the stuff like I was glued to, but then it's like where was this stuff in the first 5 episodes? Like my sister and we watched it together and we were like, I fell asleep at the last 30 minutes of the 5th episode. I was so bored, honestly. But you know, when I was rewatching it, I was just like, where was all this stuff? Like this should have been what glued us and then had more tense stuff coming on, but
yeah, so it sounds to me that this season ultimately will have promise once the last 5 drop, but it is unfortunately fallen victim to Netflix's latest attempt to try and compete with everyone. Because I mean, Chris and I have talked about this on previous podcasts before, but again, where Netflix was the only company in the streaming game for so long, and then during COVID, all of these other companies started these streaming services, and the problem is they kind of turned Netflix's strategy on it. Where again, back in the day when Netflix was first becoming a thing, and they would drop all their episodes at once as opposed to releasing them on a weekly basis, that was such a new thing and people were all into that. But over the years, they've kind of lost a little bit of their luster because again, people just don't have as much time. There's way too much content. They don't know what content to pick.
And since Netflix is not only one to skyrocket the prices for it, we have now the sharing password.
Yeah, the password sharing, the latest.
Nobody's going to want to do that.
So the latest instance of BS, the ad tier that they introduced, which I already know. Again, it's an ad tier. Ad tiers are always garbage. Also, the fact that they were going back on their word in which they said, oh, we're never going to do ads. Yeah, right. Okay. If the money's screaming long enough and if Wall Street's got a fire under your ass and if your stock drops low enough, yeah, okay. But now, in an attempt, because literally every other streaming service has implemented the strategy of drop a couple episodes, like 2 to 3 at first, and then drop the rest week to week. And for the most part, that's been working. Well, I mean, every streaming service has their own problems right now because of things going on in the industry. But for the most part, that's worked. Again, HBO's had that model going since their inception over the last 30 years, and they just basically translated that over to their streaming service. Some of the Max originals drop a couple episodes a week, but for the most part, that works. Disney Plus, it's once a week. Amazon, it's once a week. Hulu, it's once a week. Apple, it's once a week. All these other streaming services do it once a week. So Netflix, and because that benefited all of the social media and streaming pundits that profit off of that by writing and covering this stuff, Netflix kind of found themselves boxed in because they're like, oh, we can't drop as much stuff because people just aren't going to have time, and because of the reputation that we've garnered, because most of our stuff isn't good, they're probably just going to skip our stuff and go to something that's, you know, that's more reliable, since a lot of the other stuff is like based on already known pre-existing IP. So they tried this experiment. I believe Arcane was the first instance where they tried this, where they tried splitting up the seasons over a period of time, but not by doing it like on a weekly basis. Where Arcane, what they did is they dropped it in batches of 3 over the course of 3 weeks in the fall of 2021. I believe this was in November. And that was pretty much a success for them. And then in 2022, they did that with a couple different shows where they split Ozark's final season up into 2 sets of 7, which again is a strategy that they've done that other pre-existing TV networks have done for since time of memoriam. Like I said, Sopranos, Mad Men, Breaking Bad, all of these shows did that, where they split their last season up over the course of a couple years, you know, but they were all technically one season.
Yeah, and they're doing that now with Yellowstone.
They're doing that with Yellowstone as well, where again they split season 5 up. But that also had to do with like with Kevin Costner's and his shooting demands. I don't think that necessarily had to do with any story choices. But you have Netflix trying to do that now. The problem is that, like everything else with Netflix, there's no consistency to it. You know, Ozark split its last season up into 2 sets of 7, split apart by the first 7 dropped in January, and then the last 7 dropped in April of last year. Stranger Things did a similar thing where they dropped their first 7 episodes Memorial Day weekend in May, and then waited a couple months and dropped their last 2 episodes, which were both full-length movies in the form of episodes, where again, the finale of Stranger Things season 4 is 2.5 hours long. Again, I will reiterate, longer than the Marvel movie that dropped at the same time, Thor: Love and Thunder, which didn't even clock in at a full 2 hours. That was mind-blowing to me. And then you also got there was something else that they did this with too that I'm currently drawing a blank on. BoJack, they split its last season up into 2 parts, but that was only separated by like a couple months. That worked because again, it was a holiday season, and then COVID happened, like when BoJack dropped its last 8, and that ended up working out really well. But the problem is that there's no consistency to it, and because Netflix has set their formula, for lack of a better word, to such a T, it kind of impacts it sometimes negatively and adversely. Like Ozark, it was weird because those first 7 episodes of season 4 were actually pretty good, and I thought a return to form in a way that I thought season 3 wasn't. And then those last 7 episodes came, and they tried to introduce all these new characters and plot lines, and I'm like, okay, you're supposed to be wrapping the show up. And the way that Ozark ended, they may as well have been setting up for another season. And I'm like, oh, but this is the finale. Stranger Things, it kind of worked because it was a penultimate season. So ultimately, everything that was happening in that season was setting up for the final season. So that one, and also not to mention, like I said, another turnaround from I thought a very disappointing 3rd season, I thought did very well. So you have You, which is the latest instance of it. And You, like I said, since the transition over to Netflix, has a pretty established formula where the first 5 episodes are setting up for all the crazy, stupid shit that's going to happen in the last half. Like I said, I watched episode 6 of this first season, and already that episode alone was insane, where I'm like, you have him like, he's already gotten the shit beat out of him by his neighbor. He's driving up to stalk Beck to Peach's place because he knows that Peach is trying to like it's interesting too how like they introduce these other characters that like are better than him, quote unquote, because they're not like, stalker murderers, but at the same time, like,
they do insane stuff too.
They do insane stuff in their own right. Like this show has definitely demonstrated that there are other forms of crazy as well. And
but Joe is the crazy king. Everybody around him are just like little pawns to the craziness, and he's the crazy king.
Help me break this down, right? So this girl Peach is trying to like proposition this girl back to move to Paris. I don't know. I have such a love-hate relationship with Peach because again, Peach is the James Dokes of that first season, where like you have to sympathize with her because she's the only character that's smart enough to see through Joe's facade.
Yeah.
But the problem is that she's also an asshole in her own right, who is completely unlikable.
Like, she's one I wouldn't want to be friends with, but then I understand, right.
Like she's smart enough to do the legwork when she puts 2 and 2 together that Joe has been stalking Beck. But again, she's such an asshole in her own right that like when Joe fucking slugs her in the back of the head with a rock, you're kind of like, go Joe. Like it's so weird and twisted, and I'm like, I always feel weird whenever Netflix like gives me feelings like that, or any show for the matter, where it's like, I'm not supposed to like this guy. Why are you making me root for this guy? Like it's so weird.
Yeah,
but, like,
that's what we all like about our serial killer stuff. We always find like the charm in them, and I also feel like Joe is so charming that it's like disgusting that what he does, you're like, oh, he's cutting up people, but he's so charming when he goes on these dates, and the way that he like will pop up out of nowhere and be like, oh yeah, I'm just here too.
Yeah. Well, because here's the problem that I have, right? And again, we've been comparing this a lot to Dexter throughout this thing. And here's the number one thing that I have. I think where Dexter has a little bit of an edge on it is that Dexter went out of its way to show that ultimately Dexter as a character is someone who is not in control of his actions. And this is his way of like controlling them, by directing what are ultimately evil urges towards people who deserve them. Hence the vigilante aspect, where he is ultimately, Dexter is a vigilante show. That's what makes it so compelling. The fact that he was the victim of this horrific crime when he was very young that traumatized him, and then happened to be lucky enough to be adopted by somebody who was able to recognize those signs early on and hone them into something that would ultimately be more productive than harmful to both Dexter and society in general.
And to be fair, that's like what Joe had a similar, experience from that. Like, I'm not sure how far you're getting into that.
So that's the problem is I have yet to get to that point with Joe. I have yet to see his backstory and what made him into this person. And I don't know what kind of an effect that's going to have on me, because again, the difference is that ultimately Dexter is in a strange way, beneficial towards society because he's ultimately eliminating people who would do harm to society, you know?
Yeah,
Because again, it's always those people that he ends up getting way too close to that end up being more detrimental, and then they end up posing a threat to him, so he has to deal with them. So a little bit of it is in self-interest, but like he is ultimately, in a strange way, like a good person, if that makes any sense, you know? Versus Joe, everything about Joe is completely out of self-interest. You know, he is looking for love that he wants, but he's going about it in the complete wrong way. And then in subsequent seasons, when he gets that love, it ends up being like one of those, oh, be careful what you wished for scenarios, you know? And so that's kind of where I'm interested to see where the future of the show goes. But that's kind of where my problems start with it. And more so, like, again, my problem with the emphasis on like what types of shows writers are going for now, where I don't want to bring morals into it too much, but I will say that our current generation, and I don't think this is a secret, has a little bit of a problem understanding like the differences between like moralistic areas, because the difference between something like this and the shows of old, like your Sopranos, your Breaking Bads, your Dexters, your whatnots, is those shows always reminded you that ultimately who you were watching were bad people. You were rooting for them for sure because they always had some extra bit of edge to make you root for them, you know? Tony Soprano, he's suffering from panic attacks, you know?
Yeah.
Walter White is an emasculated male trying to reclaim his edge, you know? Dexter is ultimately the victim of this horrible tragedy that has somehow shaped him into this vigilante, you know? Even Game of Thrones to an extent, if we want to go there, you know, which is the ultimate definition of, oh, the bad guys win in real life, you know? Even Game of Thrones, I think, did a good enough job of separating and making us understand why said bad guys in that show were the way they were, but also why we shouldn't necessarily sympathize them and how kind of that extreme empathy can be a danger, you know? And I think the problem that comes from a lot of the shows that we are getting now that are attempting to capture similar struggles and characters and problems like that is that they're not necessarily, I think, reminding us that these are bad people. They're leaving it up to the audience to come to that conclusion to themselves. And the problem is that we are a generation that unfortunately has proven time and time again that we are incapable of differentiating, because how many people our age do we know? How many, and I know you know these people as well as I do, that idolize people like Jordan Belfort, like Tyler Durden from Fight Club, like Walter White, that are like, yeah, that guy was awesome, you know, fuck Skyler, fuck all those guys that were like trying to stop him. He was the man, you know? And it's like, and Gilligan even talked about this. It's like, yeah, it was a little concerning how many people were like rooting for Walt. And David Chase said the same thing about Tony Soprano.
Just bring this up. Girls fantasize of like wanting to be with Joe Goldberg. And I'm just like, okay, he's cute, but you know, we're getting all this stuff to him. He'll do certain things for you, but it's all very, 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 very bad. This is like no good. This is like psychopathic behavior that nobody wants. Like, I wouldn't put up with Joe Goldberg. Like,
it's interesting because like we constantly are asking ourselves, like, why can't we get more quote unquote smart material? And unfortunately, the answer is kind of, the proof is in the pudding. And strange enough, I think we have Adam McKay to thank for this, because even though Adam McKay stuff has been very hit or miss recently, the one thing that Adam McKay stuff has proven is that people are stupid to an unknown level.
Especially rich people. I feel like this is more common. We're seeing this more idea of where the stupid is what we're making fun of. This
right. And like, so kind of the point where I'm trying to get at is I always think back to where, even though I was not a fan of Vice, the Dick Cheney movie that he did at all, I think that he just blatantly misunderstood how to tell that story. I think the biopic elements of that were great. And every time he tried to dip back into the pseudo mockumentary style was when that was when
don't get me started with Don't Look Up.
Well, I'll get into that as well, because I have a take on Don't Look Up, but I actually do like Don't Look Up. But my problem with Vice is every time they got into like the stupid pseudo mockumentary stuff, that and like the asides with the insert, like that's when it lost me. And I'm like, I don't understand what the point of this is. You know, we don't need this stuff. It's not necessarily like Big Short, where this isn't like a super complex thing that nobody's gonna understand. You know?
Yeah.
So I'm like, this is Dick Cheney. It's just like a regular biopic. You know, you're good at doing a biopic, do a biopic. But the end credit scene, where you had like the two guys, like the Republican and the Democrat, like the interview room, get into the fist fight, and then somebody saying something about the latest Fast and Furious trailer or something like that. And like, I got what he was going for, but it was too on the nose and dumb. And I think that with Don't Look Up, strangely enough, he captured it the best, where I think the thing that everybody missed about Don't Look Up is the fact that that movie ultimately was not a mockumentary is the strange thing. Like that movie, which again, it was supposed to start out as a metaphor for climate change. That movie ended up being like, nah, I'm just going to tell like exactly like, essentially like that movie was essentially like capturing almost exactly how it was like during the Trump presidency, like how people thought just the blatant, like just easy stuff that like news networks and the mainstream media were able to get away with and made it so difficult to when people who were trying to get out there to tell the truth about something couldn't even be taken seriously. And that is ultimately showing just how blatantly confused and misinformed people can be just in general when it comes to just anything, you know? And so that's why I feel like the job of good critics recently has been to more so differentiate for people what is good sorry, but not good. What is like actually intelligent versus what is not. But they're coming into constant conflict because unfortunately, the other problem with people is that people, you know, love what they love and they will defend it to within an inch of their life. And the problem is that people don't always have a good reason for liking what they like. And so that's why I feel like kind of the more difficulty of critics has come from, because critics always kind of get lumped into this bag of, oh, they're just bigwigs who are just, you know, trying to hate everything. And to a certain extent there, that's true. Because again, I also have said many times that I don't consider myself a critic really anymore, because most critics just have takes that A, I don't agree with, but B, just also don't even make sense when it's like, are we even talking about the same thing? You know, they just go so far down the rabbit hole and just so far up their own ass that like, I don't even think you understand what people actually like watching. You know, you're just all about yourself now. And so that kind of is where like the critical debate always comes in, you know, and it's why I feel like critics just like don't even want to touch stuff like this that or stuff that like people like actual people watch anymore, you know, because they're like, oh, people just don't know what they like, so they're just watching this just because it's entertaining, you know, and I don't like it, so therefore I'm not going to watch it, you know. And I think that's so antithetical to what being a critic is, you know. Again, like the definition of the word has changed so much in the last couple of years, but like there are still some base elements that should still exist, you know, that have devolved into like, again, how, you know, you have the channels that say, oh, everything is political and, you know, everything needs to be not political. And you have the channels that are like, oh, you know, we just want to like what we like and not be told how to think. And you have other channels that are like, oh, you should think about this stuff, but they do it in like, but they try to do it in like a really not preachy, obnoxious way and all that. And it's like all of these different things. And then, like I said, you have the YouTubers that have just, and the YouTubers that have just been like on so long now that they're just like YouTube staples, you know? And I'm always kind of at this loss when it comes to like kind of what makes a thing good anymore, you know, because it's like, okay, I like this thing, but they have all these things that make it problematic, but it's still really entertaining to watch. But am I watching it for the right reasons, you know? And I had a similar problem with Euphoria, not necessarily Ozark. Ozark, I think, is just bad. But again, it all comes back to Netflix, because I feel like Netflix is the one that has been promoting this stuff, because they had a point where they were actually diving into, I think, intellectually stimulating, interesting think piece area when they were doing shows like Glow, shows like American Vandal, shows like the serial killer stuff is kind of hit or miss for me, but like when David Fincher did Mindhunter, and
oh my gosh, Mindhunter,
all that stuff, which to me was when Netflix was like, yes, do that, but nobody watched that stuff, you know, because that wasn't the stuff that people responded to. So now they've essentially kind of devolved into becoming like the CW 2.0, and I'm like,
and to be fair, they stream a lot of CW shows.
They do stream a lot of CW shows, but again, like the CW is all soap opera stuff made for teens. And I already have a ton of problems with stuff that is made for teens now, because again, teens are so easily manipulated in just whatever direction they go.
I mean, given that we live in this technology generation of like, you know, we're talking over the computer now. Like this is what, you know, they didn't grow up like how we did with like, you know, waiting for the commercials. You know, they live in this atmosphere where it's just at their fingertips and they don't even have to experience a commercial. So
exactly. And it's funny because like, and I talk about this all the time where it's like, yes, we are technically both Gen Zers. I mean, you're right on the cutoff of millennials. I'm like right on the cutoff of Gen Zers. So like we don't really kind of fit into either one of those bubbles. But the thing that is like the biggest difference is that like, we grew up right when this stuff was started to take hold. So see, we still remember what it was like before, but we were like there when the transition was happening. So we're in this like weird back and forth state where we see both sides and we see kind of the problems and the good stuff with both sides, versus either side before or after is like not going to really get that, you know, like anybody born after the year, like I'll say like 2003, you know, is never going to know a time without smartphones, is never going to know a time without the internet, is never going to know a time without social media. And like, again, like I feel like I'm being redundant here, and I'm like just like another mouth breather because Joe Rogan talks about this stuff all the time, but Joe Rogan talks about it in a way where it's like I just feel like I'm hearing the same thing over and over and over again. I love Rogan, but like there's no nuance to any of his discussions. It's always dependent on his guests, and if he doesn't have an intelligent guest, oh my god, like I feel like I need to shoot I feel like I need to like inject like some of that brain stimulants into my head. I feel like I'm listening to like fucking two apes just like talking about like basic stuff, you know?
Would you rather hear that or Andrew Tate? Let's be fair.
Let's not bring that stuff up, okay? Because trust me, I just Andrew Tate is one of those guys that I'm like just makes me mad because because I'm like that because that is a prime example of why trolls always win. You know that is the prime example right there. Well, not even just the toxic masculinity. The fact that nothing that he's saying is anything original that anybody without two brain cells would be able to figure out. But it's the fact that he has garnered the whole toxic masculinity, which is such a fucking facade too, and is literally just turned into like this hype troll thing that him and his brother do. You know, that's the thing that pisses me off because it's like I hate it because that ultimately shows I'm like, yeah, that's another example of it's like, yeah, all these problems in society and you idiots are the ones that create this because you idiots are the ones that gravitate towards it and let these people become the icons that we are. This is how we ended up with Trump.
Yep.
It's simple. But yeah, how we got on that tangent from you, I have no idea. But essentially kind of I want to get into the future problem of this because this is this show's 4th season now. And it has not yet currently been renewed. I don't know what the plans for the future of this. Netflix usually has a cap off when it comes to their stuff at 4 seasons. You know, Stranger Things, I think, is the only original that they've done that is making it to 5. So,
to be fair, I want to bring this up too because if you remember back in the day, they also picked up Arrested Development and they went on for 5 seasons. So
true, but the difference is that Netflix, is that Arrested Development already had 3 seasons and they only did 3 more seasons on Netflix. That's the difference. Again, as an acquisition, you know, I'm talking with their originals. I think,
with their original property.
I believe that the only other original that there are only 2 other originals that they've done that have made it past 4 seasons: House of Cards and Cobra Kai. I'm pretty sure the only other 2 originals besides Stranger Things, I mean, that have made it past 4 seasons because Glow got canceled at 3, American Vandal got canceled at 2, Mindhunter, they're still in like this weird like it might come back, it might not because Netflix let the actors' contracts lapse while they were because Fincher was off busy shooting Mank and all the stupidity there. Don't even get me started on that. But like Netflix has yet to have an original that lasts. You know, like what is it? Dark only made it 3 seasons, I think. Yeah, so they have yet to have an original aside from those 2, which are like
maybe even the Spanish programs have lasted a little bit longer.
I think so. Like
Money Heist.
Yeah, like Money Heist. But I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Money Heist was an acquisition, not an original.
I'm not familiar, but I just remember seeing like, oh, this is season so and so, and this is season so and so.
And even Cobra Kai. Cobra Kai is not an original. Cobra Kai is an acquisition too because Cobra Kai had 2 seasons. They've only done when season 6 comes out, that'll only be their
final season,
their 4th season that they've done for Netflix. So my question for you is, from what you've seen so far, because Dante was telling me this, he's like, I don't really see the reason why you needed to continue past season 3. He's like, from what I saw in season 3, he's like, they could have just ended it right there. But from what I understood about season 3, I'm like, yeah, but he still gets away. I'm like, it's another one of those instances where they've kind of set themselves up where they can kind of only have one ending. And if they do anything else, it's kind of going to suck. Where I'm like, they kind of have set this up where they can only end it in a strange way, similar to how Barry season 3 ended, with Joe finally answering for his crimes in some way. You know, like, I know the circumstances around Love's death were very ambiguous, and there's probably going to be a rumor that she probably does come back at some point, and that would be cool and all as far as the whole revenge tactic. And like I said, Joe finally getting his own medicine, but I'm like, I kind of need to see Joe go to jail, though. Just saying.
You want to see either Joe be like, or go to jail,
right? But even Joe getting killed, I feel like wouldn't be as satisfying because that would just kind of be like, like, especially if it's from Love, because it's like Love has proven time and time again that she's crazier than he is. So,
yeah, I think with watching how things have been going with season 4, season 5 should wrap things up.
Okay, if there is a 5th season,
I know, and I think there will be a 5th season.
Okay.
I just know deep down in my heart, and just how passionate the fans are and how passionate fans have been over the last 2 or 3 days, there's going to be like a at least one final season to close some things. And if we don't, I would be very disappointed to see how this character is wrapped up season 3 could have actually been a good final season, even though Joe doesn't technically get away with anything. He's in London, but knowing he's getting a taste of his own medicine in this season, it's creative, but I want to see him go to jail or just eventually like owning up to everything, which he understands he does, but I want to see him like have that conclusion, of a story.
Because the other problem too that Netflix has is a very, very hard time with is having its main characters actually answer for their actions, unless again if real life actions end up affecting the show, i.e. Kevin Spacey and getting killed off silently in between seasons of House of Cards. But yeah, they're like Netflix, like they never had the birds answer for their crimes in Ozark. Joe keeps getting away with stuff over and over and over again. It's like they have this problem where whenever they have an anti-hero, they cannot have the anti-hero answer for their crimes, which again is
I want to
shows of old really good. But yeah, go.
I have a feeling too, when I was thinking about this last night and I was getting ready to meet with you, I feel like if you give this series a few more years, there is going to be some kind of reboot like what we had with Dexter, because to be fair, he has a son. And that son, I don't mean to spoil for you, but this was already in season 3. He's given away.
He gives away his son. Yeah.
And I feel like, he was given a good life. He finds out about his dad, just is able to grow Joe's instincts. And I feel like there could be a chance where we get a reboot of some kind of sort, where if that's the case where Joe is in jail, they just kind of work together, kind of what we saw or what people saw in Dexter season, that latest season.
Yeah, New Blood or whatever it was called.
So I feel like if they wrap it up with season 5, give this a few more years, we could see a reboot happen.
I will piggyback off of that, and I will say this as well: imagine if even better than that, where we have like his a few years later, and then his now like teenage son, whatever, walks back into his life, and they team up. Apropos of that, what if they pull a Boardwalk Empire where his teenage son starts working for him, but he doesn't know who he is, and then at the end, his teenage son reveals it's like, "Hi, Dad, it's me," and then kills him, and then becomes the new.
Oh my God, I would watch that.
That would be awesome. I just spitballed that right there. I'm like, come on.
Pen badly, take notes.
Yeah, come on. I would watch the shit out of that. I'm like, Netflix, get better, man. Come on. We are still pitching better ideas here than anything that you guys have put out. Like, come on.
I mean, I don't know what the series in the book has, because I know we didn't even get to mention this. This is based on a book series.
Right, so it is based on a book series, right? And so they do adapt. So are they still adapting the books that this is based on, or no? They've moved past it.
I have no clue, because I didn't even touch the books. Like, I just knew this was a book series and I haven't read it. So okay. I don't even know what's continuing on, honestly.
Yeah, so if I'm doing it, so the second season is based off of Hidden Bodies, which was the sequel. Okay. The third season, let me see here. The third season, it looks like is original. It doesn't look like it was based off of anything. Let me just check the production. Yep, You and Hidden Bodies. A third book written by the author Carolyn Kepnes was published on April 6, 2021, but it is unclear the extent in which the novel's plot would inform You's third season. Mm-hmm. So she has basically said that it is pretty much diverged at this point. So it's kind of that they've kind of surpassed the books at this point. But so that's interesting. Hopefully we won't have a Game of Thrones situation on our hands here. But with that being said, I think it's safe. I think this is a good point to wrap up where I think it's safe to say that the last 5 episodes we will be very much anticipating when they come out in March. Kristen, we will have you back on for that episode as well, because we will be covering that the weekend that they drop, as well as Scream 6. Once that comes out, that will be on the same weekend as well. That's going to be another big one. So tune in for that one, guys. I believe that will be out the second weekend of March in a month from now. So be sure to stay tuned for that. Kristen, before we get out of here, what are your final thoughts and star rating of You, the first half of season 4?
First half of season 4, I'm going to give it if I'm going to do a star rating, I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5. Or if it's like a B in my book. So maybe B to minus.
Got it. For me, I've only seen the first 6 episodes of the first season, so I have not seen enough to really give it a proper rating, but I can safely say that You is definitely one that I will keep an out for. And you, Kristen, as well once you come on
You
for
too,
future episodes. Kristen, thank you for coming on once again. You are always welcome here on the Talkin TV channel. Where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
They can follow me on Miss Flamingo on Instagram, and I'm also the co-host of the MK Productions podcast, and you can listen to the show on there. I do all sorts of like internet stuff. I'm on TikTok, whatever. That's all in the Instagram bio, so just head on over there.
It's all on the gram indeed. Of course, you can follow me at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms. Be sure to follow the official Talkin TV podcast across all platforms. This episode will be available on Monday on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or I might just drop it tomorrow if I'm feeling nice. Who knows? We'll see what the algorithm gods decide. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube if you're watching us here. Follow us on Twitch if you're still listening to us streaming there. As always, people, from myself, from Kristen, 12 seasons in a short film, and what more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.
Bye.